get a kind of mostly recognizable by the map of South America at this point. So he basically becomes the leader of the Soviet Union and says things are going to change. That he is going to modernize and liberalize. And these changes are summed up in the words Glasnost and Perestroika, which basically means openness and restructuring. What he means by that is freedom of speech and economic reform. And this is huge for the citizens of the Soviet Union. For the first time in Soviet history, they can write whatever they want to in their newspapers without fear of being thrown into jail. So at this point, things start changing very dramatically in the Soviet Union. Now, of course, the people of East Germany and Hungary and Bulgaria and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Romania, they start thinking, well, if the Soviets have freedom of speech, then we'll have freedom of speech too, right? No. Because the leaders of the other Eastern European countries, they are dinosaurs. They belong to a much older era of communism. They don't agree with Gorbachev on anything. They realize one thing that perhaps he does not. If you give the people a bit of freedom, what are they going to want? They're going to want more. So they say to their people that nothing will change, that things are just fine the way they are, and that communism is working. But the people disagree. And at this point, there's one thing that Gorbachev says which really changes the whole situation in Eastern Europe. He says that the Soviet army will no longer intervene in internal political affairs of the Eastern European countries. So what does that mean in practice? If the people of Eastern Europe, if the people of East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia decide they don't want communism, if they start going out into the streets and protesting, the Soviet tanks will not come in to put down the protests like they did in 1953 in East Germany, and like they did in 1956 in Hungary and in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. So at this point, what do you think happens straight away? Enormous protests all over Eastern Europe. And one by one, these protests start toppling the communist dictatorships. The first dictatorship to fall is Poland in 1988. Then in May of 1989, Hungary opens the border to Austria. There's a massive hole in the Iron Curtain. Where does every East German want to go on holiday that time? They go down to Hungary, over to Austria, and up into West Germany. But some of the East Germans, they start thinking, well, we don't really want to leave. Our families are here, our lives are here, our friends are here. We don't want to abandon them. We just want democracy within our own countries. So the protest movement starts becoming larger and larger and larger in East Germany, until eventually it culminates in the largest protest in all of German history. On November the 4th, 1989, in Alexanderplatz in East Berlin, just by the TV tower, 500,000 East Berliners are demanding an end to the Stasi. They're demanding freedom of speech. They're demanding freedom to travel to the West. They're demanding free elections. And at this point, the East German government is panicking because the Soviet army isn't there to back them up anymore. And they think, if we don't do something to calm these protesters down, we're going to have revolution. What can we do? What can we give them that will make them shut up for a bit? Freedom of speech? No, that's not going to work. Freedom of elections? That's not going to work either, because then they'll just vote us out. What else do they want? They want freedom to travel to the West. Okay, we can do that. We can allow some people to start traveling to the West. However, it is of course going to be a tightly controlled and regulated process. It's going to be bureaucratic. People will need visas. It's going to take several weeks. So we can control this. Now, they have several emergency meetings discussing how they are going to bring travel reform to East Germany. Eventually, on November the 9th, 1989, one man who has not been at any of these meetings, his name is Günter Schabowski. He's the press secretary of East Germany. The man whose job it is to talk to the newspapers and to do the press conferences and so on. Günter Schabowski has a meeting with the East German leadership. And they say to him, look, we're going to bring travel reform to East Germany. We're going to start allowing some people to go to the West. Here's a folder with everything you need to know. Günter Schabowski kind of looks at it for a bit, then he puts it in with the rest of his folders and he says, okay, well, I'm kind of busy at the moment. I've got a press conference to get to. That night, he had a press conference that was very important because it wasn't just East German journalists that were invited, but also West German and British and Italian. Journalists from all over the world were going to be there. Now, he's called this press conference together, so people, the journalists that show up, they're expecting a big announcement. They've all heard about the enormous protests that have been bringing East Germany to a standstill and that have been spreading to every city in the country. So the journalists sit down, they take their notepads out, the room falls silent as Günter Schabowski walks in, and everyone is ready for a very big announcement. Hello. Do you want to hear the story? Speak speak English? Anyway, so at this point, Günter Schabowski sits down. Everyone's really excited. He spends the next hour and a half or so talking about trade agreements with Romania. Not really what the journalists had come to hear. In fact, it was incredibly boring. So the journalists at this point, they start falling asleep. Some of them even leave the press conference. They go to the bar next door to get a beer because they're sick and tired of it. That was the biggest mistake of their careers. There's about 10 minutes left in the press conference, and Günter Schabowski's thinking to himself, let's see, am I missing anything? Did I say everything that I was supposed to say? Is there anything else I should announce? And then he remembers the folder he was given earlier that day with the travel reforms. And he thinks to himself, well, if the East German government gave this to me today, they must have wanted me to announce it. So he takes this folder out, he opens it up, and he does something which, if you're a politician, you should never ever do. He reads a top secret document aloud on live international television. Now he doesn't read all of it, he just wants to get the main point across, so he kind of skims through it for a little bit, then he looks up at the cameras and he says, oh everyone, by the way, almost forgot, silly me, travel restrictions between East and West Germany will be lifted.
Oh.
Any questions? As you can imagine, journalists are, the initial